This is the Christmas Movie Screenwriter Podcast, episode number 1. Hello and welcome to the Christmas Movie Screenwriter Podcast. I'm your host, Karen McCann. This is our debut episode, and I'm very excited to be launching this podcast. The Christmas Movie Screenwriter is a podcast and blog about writing, producing, and selling Christmas movies. I'm also launching a membership website to connect writers and producers of heartwarming Christmas movies worldwide. You can sign up at www.christmasmoviescreenwriter.com. Our first guest is Scott Kirkpatrick of Nicely Entertainment. He discusses how Christmas movie screenwriters can stand out from the competition, how writers need to be entrepreneurs, different outlets for your script, and much more. Here is the main segment. Today's guest is Scott Kirkpatrick. Scott Kirkpatrick is the Executive Vice President of Co-Productions and Distribution for Nicely Entertainment, a Los Angeles-based production and distribution company that produces original TV movies and scripted TV series, where he brokers major content deals and has executive produced a variety of TV movies, including Christmas at the Amish Bakery, Sappy Holiday, and The Snowball Effect. Previously, Kirkpatrick served as the Senior Vice President of North American Sales and Business Development for the London-based Ment Studios UK, where he oversaw international television distribution deals on a variety of programs. Prior to this, Kirkpatrick served as an Executive Director of Distribution for Mar Vista Entertainment, a Los Angeles-based production and distribution company that produces original TV movies and has managed international TV deals on major franchises. He is the author of the books Writing for the Green Light, How to Make Your Script the One Hollywood Notices, Introduction to Media Distribution, Film, Television, and New Media, and Mastering the Pitch, How to Effectively Pitch Your Ideas to Hollywood. Kirkpatrick lives in Los Angeles with his wife and 2 children. So, Scott, thank you for coming on the show today.
No, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, I told the audience a little bit about you, but why don't you take a minute and tell us about yourself and your business?
Yeah, the bio you read is quite the overly formalized version of my world. It's, I currently I'm executive producing a lot of TV movies. I've always been on the side, sort of the business side of the industry. Didn't start that way. I started more on the production end, very much wanted to be on that creative end. And then I personally just found a lot of creativity and excitement putting these deals together and making these projects sort of come to life. I basically, in a nutshell, I put the right people in the room and connect money to creative and get things moving.
Well, that's a talent. That is a talent. Now let's start. Now, obviously, this podcast is called the Christmas Movie Screenwriter. So let's start with that. What are some key elements or qualities that you look for in a Christmas screenplay that would motivate you to produce it?
Well, I think coming from the business side, my answers are a little bit different, maybe than where a lot of writers may normally get their information, which are much more focused on story, plot, and all of that. My main views are really, look, story's critical. Like, don't take that wrong. It's female driven, specifically with Christmas. That's really vital. Having that sort of a lot of those themes and story arcs are super important, and I'm happy to dive into those. But really, another series of things that I look for, I would call them production logistics. You know, reading a script, being able to see it, that this is sort of more or less ready to shoot is really important. Knowing that you could, not have it be too expensive to produce. There's always that sort of question mark about cliches with these movies. You know, they do follow a bit of a formula in a way, but at the end of the day, I like to think of these kind of like comfort food. And at the end, you do need it to sort of fit into the box that's going to be the cozy comfort food on a grocery store shelf. So you do need certain conventions, but having a creative take on it or a new look at that is always really exciting. So I would say it's formulaic, but a fresh take of the same old thing is always fun. And then something that is like more or less ready to shoot, like it can be shot in 12 to 15 days, for instance, that it's not going to cost an extreme amount of money, and that there aren't things like scenes that take place in moving cars and such that just really slow things down.
So,
Also, sorry, not to.
go ahead.
I was going to say also, our relationship with the writer is important. So even if it's a new writer, making sure you're kind of on the same page creatively, and that's usually just done by a phone call after we come across a project that we are interested in.
When you say 12 to 15 days, and you mentioned production logistics, ready to shoot, can you be a little more specific?
Yeah, certainly. So ready to shoot would sort of mean that a writer has thought through all of the attributes of their scripts so that there aren't characters that are just popping up to do dialogue for like one scene. That if a character is introduced, they do play an important part in the overall project, that they would actually need to be on set for more than, just one quick scene, because if you're going to pay the expense of having them come in, you want to make sure that they're actually going to be a critical role. And they might, if they're going to be on set for a day, they should be there for the full day and working the full day, so to speak. You want to make sure that, as I was sort of mentioning, that some of your scenes just aren't in locations that are very expensive, or that you don't have very expensive, grandiose moments like a Christmas parade that requires, tons of extras and lots of equipment, like basic logistics like that. And yeah, these things shoot fast. They're 12 days, 14 days, sometimes 18-day shoots. The most maybe on a quote bigger budget one would be like 24, let's say. But that's not a lot of time. And anybody who's been on set, a lot of scenes are getting photographed each day. So you sort of have to make sure that you're using recurring locations, and that you can sort of squeeze that in a way that is not going to feel forced or rushed or anything like that.
Is there a template that you prefer, like these many speaking roles, these many locations?
There's not really, it's a great question. There's not a clear formula. And the reason is this, when you're actually, a lot of these are shot on location. And if you happen to be at a location where, let's say you are able to get a restaurant or something along those lines. Maybe part of the restaurant could actually be cheated to get a totally different type of location. So you could actually knock out multiple scenes. So it's hard to sort of, I would think of it more as like production moves.
Right.
You want to make sure that you're not going to require your production team to be moving all that often, because that's at least 3 hours of just dead time during a production day when they're just getting from one place to another. So as long as those can be cut down as much as possible, or if you're on set, that you can get as much shot in one location, that's best. But I would say like two main speaking, that's your love interest usually, like two main roles. And then a handful of supporting roles that are there to support the objectives of those two main characters, and your antagonist and all that. But like really, keep it like 12 and under in terms of total, and ideally even less if you can, and avoid kids, at least really young kids, or write them in a very clever way because they're tough to schedule.
Does that 12 and under include actors that only have 5 lines or less?
Yeah, I mean, in those kinds of situations, that's workable because you can get them. I mean, again, if they're going to be there for the day, they can work fewer hours. They do have to take breaks for school and things like that, depending on how many days they need to be on set. So if you write them, I would say like sporadically sprinkling them in, peppering them in, so to speak, in critical moments, and you make sure that when they're in a scene, they're truly in the scene. That they're not just there for a line of dialogue. That's, and it has to support, obviously, the main love story that's driving the film.
Okay. No, you sort of alluded to this earlier about formula. Some critics say Christmas movies are formulaic, and I think we all kind of agree on that. How can writers make their scripts stand out, even though they have to kind of not paint within the lines, but you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Look, they are formulaic, and it's as I mentioned, it's a comfort food, and it is supposed to, for an audience, they do want it to kind of fit a certain style, story structure. Having something fresh in there, like a fresh take on it, is always a little bit more interesting. The meet, I would say, put your focus on the meet cute moment because generally the vast majority of these films are female-led romances. So whenever that meet cute moment pops up, that's really your chance to do something original. I think that the fun moments as to how they kind of play that character dance in terms of the moments they find each other, the moments they realize they have a chemistry together, what's keeping them apart. You can do a lot of different things within the genre and still hit all the, spot on story beats and all that, and still have enough difference that makes it a totally unique film. But I mean, end of day, like, yes, it has to fit in. But I mean, I've mentioned this in other conversations about the topic. It's like architects have to deal with gravity and building codes. Like no industry is separate from having to fit and follow certain rules and color within the lines, as you say. So it's how can you color in the lines? How can you satisfy all those broadcast requirements and parameters that are set in place by VOD platforms and audience expectations, and still make something fun and unique? And the truth is, you can do quite a bit. And I think sometimes having the rigid rules makes creativity really pop out when it's there, when it's given the chance.
Is there like a maximum number of pages, or it's like anything over 85 pages that's like too long, or does it?
Well, I think running time is different than page count. Right, I mean, I know page count is like, yeah, you're right, like a minute a page, so to speak. I would say it should never be over 100 pages. I think like 94, 98 is a good sweet spot, because if you have 94 pages, even if you have to trim a scene or shorten it a little bit, you're guaranteed to sort of hit the network minimums or the VOD minimums, VOD, video on demand minimums of, 86 to, I would say like 85 to 88 minutes, including credits, is sort of the ideal. And if you have 94-ish pages, that's long enough to sort of assure everyone that, hey, we'll have enough coverage here to hit the minutes. And if there's something that's just dragging, we can trim it and still be within the network minimums. Okay.
Now, how do you find scripts? Do you tend to hire WGA writers or non-union writers?
We've worked with both. WGA writers are much more expensive. So, you can only really acquire those scripts or work with WGA talent on more of the larger scale Christmas movies. So those would be like your premium network, your premium video on demand platforms. Most of these projects are non-union, and most are from non-union writers.
Okay.
And how they get to us, a lot of it's recommendation. A lot of it is, we've seen blind pitches and blind submissions. I've been to conferences and markets and have had people approach. I think what separates a writer who gains traction from a writer who sort of doesn't make the impact they need to stand out, personal branding. I think writers should utilize the internet and take advantage and create a little page for themselves, and they can talk about their strengths. I think writers who come in the door with one script, if that script doesn't nail it, then they usually don't get a call back. But if they can come in with like 3 scripts that are in the same genre and like 5 to 10 ready to go log lines and ideas, and just kind of showcase there's somebody who can just pitch, write, and hit what's needed quickly, that's always going to be somebody who gets some attention. So if you're writing a genre that's really known, I call them like goldmine genres or very popular genres, Christmas is definitely one of those. And if you have several ideas ready to go, plus a script or 2, that's the kind of writer that pops out. And where they come from all over the place.
Well, it's good to know. I'm glad we can share that with the writers out there. You should have at least, hopefully 3 Christmas scripts finished, and then 5 to 10 log lines. So that's very, very helpful.
Yeah, and look, it's a lot, I know, but it's like, I think write a script, just and then just work on the next one. As a writer, you should always be writing, and you should always be creating new product. And I think that over time, that should be your target, is to have 2 to 3 scripts, 5 to 10 ideas, all ready to go and present.
That's great advice. Now, how do you see the film and television industry evolving in the coming years, especially with the popularity of ChatGPT or other AI tools? Do you think this will diminish or increase opportunities for writers as well as producers?
I think it's an increase. I know it real look. I'll admit, like some of it is a little bit alarming when you see how um, uh, intuitive, we'll say, some of the AI can be. But I don't see it as a threat at the end of the day. I see these things as tools. You know, Google Maps is not a threat to anybody. You know, it's you don't have to use it even if it's telling you to go on one street versus another. And that's honestly how I view it. Uh, I would be. I've been asked before if we would acquire a script if it was predominantly written with AI. And the answer is like, yeah, because good luck getting it to actually spit out something that makes coherent sense. At the end of the day, really, you need humans to craft these things. You need humans to tell these stories. And I think that these tools can allow writers to maybe move more efficiently. And I think they're valuable resources in terms of, as we were talking about earlier, weeding out the cliched ideas.
Right.
Or using it almost like a thesaurus, like where else can a scene take place? And, you know, they can actually spit out good solutions to those sorts of problems. But I see it as an opportunity. And where I see the industry going is a continual, how do I say this? To reel it back a bit, I mean, going way back to like the 1950s, you know, when TV first popped up, advertising was the thing that funded it and really made it work. And I only see that pattern continuing. You know, Netflix swore up and down all through the 2000 teens it would never integrate advertising into its model. And here they are doing it right now and quite successfully. Every, you know, fast channels are really the craze right now. I think that this natural blending of ads into media has always been there. And I think that continuation is going to be the future. But I think what we're going to start to see is very smart, integrated advertising to the point where it's not jarring, it's not overt, it feels very subtle, and it's only really appealing to you if you're the right target for it. That's sort of where I think that intersection is where we're headed, and it's where I'm personally putting my focus on.
Oh, okay, great. Now you sort of mentioned budgets earlier. Should writers be concerned with budgets when they're writing their story? And what is your ideal budget for a Christmas TV movie?
So my answer is yes, they should think about it. I know that every screenwriting book says to do the opposite, but it goes back to production logistics. I mean, it's like, you know, the theory, the ideal is that you can write this amazing script. And because it's an amazing script, it'll just float to the surface and it will be made because it needs to be made. And that's not reality. Reality is production companies and distributors and channels and VOD platforms need content. They have limited budgets. And so it either fits that budget or it doesn't. And so writing for logistics, writing with a budget in mind is something that does separate one writer from another, and it does separate one script from another. The ideal budgets, these are under $1 million. These are
under what?
Are under $1 million. These are, I would say, even, you know, $700,000 and below. And, you know, that's like the gross budget all in. Now, yes, there can be some that scale above that. But I think the core film should be able to get captured on camera for under $1 million. So that limits you to, you know, a handful of locations, cute, charming towns, a couple of interiors, mostly interiors. The outside scenes, a lot of these movies get shot in the summertime and they need snow. So that means you have to fake the snow, and that's challenging. So you have to sort of think it through like that. So I would say write it cheap, dialogue heavy, make the moments and interactions, focus on the cute, the meet cute, the character builds, the character reveals, and you know, avoid the big grandiose locations and too many actors. And you can usually hit that number pretty efficiently.
Okay. Now, how valuable is having a letter of interest in LOI from an experienced Christmas movie director or actor? If you got a script with that, would you put that at the top of your scripts to read next pile?
Yes, but depending on who the letters of intent are from. You know, if it's somebody who really knows the space, like, okay, let's talk director for a second. I would say between the two, just to be candid, actor LOI is more important than director LOI in this space. If we were talking horror films or some other genre, I might say the opposite. But for Christmas movies, it's talent driven, I would say more so. So if it's from a director, that's certainly valuable to the package. But I would look them up, and I'd want to see a director who has experience directing in this space, or maybe it's a person who's never directed before, but they have experience, let's say, being a DP on films like this, or being, some capacity where they know the formula, they know the budgets, they know the workflows, they have experience. Because a director at the end of the day is really a project manager. So that's sort of how I would see that. So on the letter of intent for talent, since I do think that has a little bit more importance for Christmas movies, the answer is yes, it's important, and it would have to be like a good name, and I don't want to name drop on this podcast per se, but somebody who's like truly known, somebody who's like you know their name, you know their face when you see them on a poster. They don't have to be A-list talent, obviously, but they have to be somebody who makes you say, "Oh, wow, okay, didn't know they were doing Christmas movies," or "I know them really well. I know them because of Christmas movies." But somebody in that space who's like has a real track record in the industry and has real the ability to get clicks or views from people who know nothing about our industry, because they're known enough to be household names, or known enough to be, oh yeah, it's that person from that show, that they would actually take a moment to look at. That's the value of the name.
Okay. Now, how would you suggest screenwriters expand their network of producers? Would you say networking, and could you give examples, or competitions, or utilizing online platforms?
Yeah, so I think I do go back to branding. I do think that a writer needs to look at themselves as, they're entrepreneurs. They have to be, showcase themselves as being truly writers who are ready to write and career writers. And so what I mean by that is having a website with the kinds of projects you've done. If you haven't done any, showcase some samples. Describe the kinds of projects you're focused on. That way it's a very clear understanding of who this person is, what they're doing. I would say something that's really vital is, yes, networking, but also networking with people who aren't just writers. I would say networking with people who work in totally different fields, because if you only talk to writers, you tend to only get, kind of like if you're only reading the screenplay books, they talk about like how the industry sometimes should work and not necessarily how it does. And that seems to be that little tiny difference, is sort of the disconnect between writing a lot and not gaining much traction versus writing a lot and all of a sudden having people respond to you. And then I would definitely say it is worth, it's worth doing the competitions, because, that gives you some laurels and something to kind of boast about. That's something you can put on your website, for instance. I would say utilize social media. You can create a handle for yourself that is your professional social media, and keep it professional. It's sort of a calling card for yourself, and post about the genre you're taking an interest in, or the genres you're taking an interest in. And then another way I think that writers can sort of get into this is, and Christmas is great for this, is writing novels. It's a great way to maybe dive into the stories you want to do anyway, dive a little deeper, work them out. You're not restricted by budget and all that with a novel. And actually, even if you're a self-published author, having a couple of books under your belt, it does give you like a big leg up in terms of, oh, okay, this person's a real writer, and then, networks and conventions, those do go places, but I wouldn't go to film festivals per se. I would really focus on the true market for film and TV. So that would be, whether it's American film market, some of them are overseas, which are a little bit more challenging to reach. But, MIPCOM in France, European film market, any of those where distributors are actually going to be, first off, they're eye-opening in terms of seeing how the business of the media works and how films and TV shows are actually bought and sold. But it can also be a way to actually have direct meetings It's expensive though. So, I mean, definitely think that through first, and definitely don't just show up. You got to go prepared. You got to have those scripts written. You got to have the ideas written. You have to have your meetings set up in advance. Because if you just go hoping to sort of score some meetings, you're just going to wander booth to booth and not be able to meet with anybody. And it's like, why'd you spend the money? So that would sort of be my view on it.
Okay.
Also, I'm sorry, like there are industry events and things of that nature that are like designed for meetups. Those are certainly a good way to do things too.
Right. Now, can you share any insights into the current market trends or demands in the film industry that screenwriters should consider when developing these Christmas scripts?
I take a view on this that like trends are always changing, and what is popular today can change drastically in the next few months. So I would say, don't, by the time you see a trend like on TV, like whatever happened in the Christmas movies of last year, like that's over and done with. And so what is happening today for this Christmas season? Because, it's July when we're recording this, and, we're gearing up full force for Christmas 23 into 2024. So there are some trends, but at the end of the day, it's like, by the time a screenwriter were to put those into the script, there's a high probability those may not be popular anymore. And if that's the case, they might have just kind of shot their opportunity. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I would say I avoid trends altogether, and I really just try to focus on a script that meets the conventions, that focus on clever, creative meet cutes, make really good, totally evergreen, can work anytime, any year, any type of cast, sort of productions. And then, the scripts you're writing, the spec scripts, in truth, probably may or may not be the ones that actually get you the work. You might get hired to do another script, but they're your showcase. And then a producer or a distributor or somebody else may say, hey, can you write a film that has these things in it? And then they're telling you the trend they need because they need it for a deal to close. So long-winded way of me basically saying I try to avoid trends, because anything I say now in a week or a month, it could totally be like the wrong thing. So
exactly exactly right. Now, if you could give advice to your younger self about producing Christmas movies, what would it be?
First off, I would say this. There's a lot more creativity in them than I ever would have expected before I got into this space. When I was, younger and I was getting into this industry, I absolutely, wanted to do these like big, epic, sweeping, types of movies and such. And then once I sort of realized where the real industry was and what the real projects that move through the industry, I would go back to myself and just say this, like, if you want to break into the film and TV business, there are those big studio projects, yes, but they're very, very, very hard to reach. And the barriers of entry, all the walls of barrier are so hard to break through. However, the majority of media that is getting produced, like the vast majority of it, is independent. A lot of it's non-union or minimal union, we'll say. Okay. And they're very open to new ideas. They're much more forgiving about like lack of experience in terms of like you don't have a ton of titles to your name. And like if you want to get your foot in the door at any point in your life, but especially when you're starting out, the independent space is fantastic. And Christmas movies, last year they produced 172 of them. I mean, that's insane for like 2.5 months of program. 172, mostly non-union, mostly independent films, mostly under $1.5 million in budget. And a lot of those were written by people who have very minimal credits to their name. So just by looking at statistics, right, this space and independent media in general is the best way to like sort of get your foot in the door and build a career. And a lot of younger people, myself included, wasted a lot of time or will waste a lot of time trying to go after the wrong group to get their foot in the door.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. Do you think that number is going to grow or is it, do you think it's going to get saturated, that 172?
I mean, it does go through periods of getting oversaturated. Yes. But here's the thing. I felt this way, let's say 2018, 2019, somewhere in there. At that time I was at Nent. I was here in LA, but I was the company's in London, but I was always here in LA. But my sense was this, because I was talking to the Netflixes and all of the, the SVOD companies. And my sense was always like, they're focused so much on television series, and that's so expensive to produce. I was like, the TV movie is really going to come back strong because they're relatively inexpensive. You can market test new ideas, market test new genres, and sort of find your footing. And then what started to happen? Exactly that. So my sense was just what the market was kind of shifting toward. I was just, I guess, picking up on that. So there was a lull in TV movies during that time period, I'll say, because everyone wanted series. And then the movie came back like big time. And we're in the middle of that now. So yes, there'll be a lull. There's going to be a slowdown in, let's say, women in peril thrillers for a little bit, and then like a bump in, I don't know, tween girl romances for a little bit. And they kind of all like fluctuate. So yes, it'll get oversaturated at some point, and then it will decrease in volume, and then it will come back strong again.
Exactly. Well, if you just look at Facebook, I mean, I was just doing some research before I started this podcast, and there are a ton of these I love Hallmark, I love Christmas. I just couldn't go through the whole list. I couldn't join all those groups. There were so many. So I think even though, yes, 172, that's a lot. Is that just American or is that worldwide?
It's not worldwide. It's North American. So that includes Canada. Yeah, that includes Canada. But I mean, these are films that came out of North America and that broadcast or premiered first time in calendar year 2022. And yeah, Lifetime, Hallmark, they certainly take on a big number of those, but they're not alone. There's Up TV, there's Hulu, there's Netflix. They're all doing originals, and BET. Like, there's a lot of outlets for these films, and people love them. And maybe it'll go up to 200, and then maybe, like, quote, in a bad year, it'll go down to like 140, let's say. That's still 140 movies.
Yeah.
Being produced, mostly non-union, mostly inexpensive, and mostly, off of scripts that are from non-union writers or new writers, So it's like, for somebody trying to get their foot in the door, if they love this genre, it's a really great one to have fun with. And you can have fun with it. These are cute, fun movies. And the fans of these, it's part of their Christmas experience. They love to have these on in the background. This makes their house feel Christmassy.
Exactly. And there's a lot of these conventions, these Hallmark conventions, where these fans are just crazy about Christmas movies.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the kind of thing, like, if you're trying to sort of get your foot in the door as a writer, those sorts of conventions where they're more fan based, I'm not going to say there aren't opportunities. You can find an opportunity anywhere, but I would say focus on the ones that are more on the business side.
Yes. Yes. Now, here's a bonus question. What kind of script would you like to produce next year? And please, if you could give some details, or is there anything in mind that you would love to do?
I'll admit I'm not the most creative guy in the world. I'm very creative with my deal making. I would say this: I'm trying to find stuff that's very much opportunistic in terms of where our industry is headed. And what I mean by that is films that can really speak to I guess, general audiences that have your love story, that don't have anything forced in them, that just give you a really wholesome sense of Christmas time. This is such a cheesy, long-winded answer, but the truth is, like, I'm not looking for a trend. I'm not looking for some embedded social cause. I'm looking for something that's kind of a blank slate in terms of it hits all the genre conventions necessary, hits all of the plot points that are necessary, hits all the logistics of production. And if it's going to do anything fun and clever, it's going to surprise me with the meet cute. And because it's sort of a blank slate in terms of opportunity, I'm able to provide that to a wider range of broadcasters. And so it can go to broadcaster A and broadcaster B and broadcaster C or VOD platform C that have very different audiences. And then we can just tweak it a little bit based on whomever is the most excited about it. You know, Roku may want something integrated with advertising. Great American Family may want something with a light splash of faith. You can take a more great concept, fun, clever, meet cute, and good script that follows the right patterns and adjust as necessary based, of course, on the writer's openness to that idea, while also, keeping in mind that you need to keep the story integrity the same. It's a very long-winded way of answering that. I apologize, but in truth, that's what I'm looking for.
No, that's great. That's great. Now, to wrap up, would you like to share any links or social media details so our audience can keep track of your work?
Yeah, so I do most of my social on LinkedIn. So, Scott Kirkpatrick, it's easy to find me there. And I do some stuff on Twitter. So I'm at SK Distribution, and that's where I post a lot about, insights about the industry or just where things are kind of heading that do involve Christmas movies.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, Scott, thank you for sharing this great information, very actionable, great kernels of wisdom that the writers will love, our whole audience will love. Thank you for coming on the Christmas Movie Screenwriter Podcast today.
No, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the time.
Okay, we'll see you later.
Okay.
And now for my takeaways. I have 6 takeaways from my interview with Scott. Number 1, production logistics. Scott says despite screenplay gurus who tout the idea great stories will find a buyer, Scott offers more business-minded advice. He says you need to make sure your script is ready to shoot. What does that mean? Well, A, keep the budget under $1 million, preferably $700,000 or below. B, limit the cast to the 2 leads and a handful of supporting roles. Avoid using child actors if possible. C, scripts that come in at a 94 to 96 page can hit the VOD, and that's video on demand minimums, which is usually 85 to 88 minutes, including credits, and have room to spare to cut if something is dragging. D, use lots of interiors and avoid grandiose locations like a Christmas parade. Number 2, pitch meetings. You should ideally have 2 to 3 finished scripts and 5 to 10 log lines. Show that you have lots of ideas to pitch. 3, be an entrepreneur. Writers should have a website that either showcases their work or writing samples. Describe the projects you're focused on. 4, get published. Writing your Christmas movie as a novel and self-publishing is an excellent way to stand out. 5, outlets. Besides Lifetime, Hallmark, and Netflix, Scott mentioned UpTV, Bet, and Hulu as possible outlets to explore. 6, be opportunistic. Make sure your script speaks to general audiences, has that love story, and a wholesome sense of Christmas. Don't throw in any embedded social cause. Scott needs to have a script that will appeal to a broad market. Later, you can tweak or tailor the script based on the broadcaster's needs. That means hitting the genre conventions, plot points, and production format. Well, that's the show. Thank you for listening. To show your support, please give us a 5-star rating on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. And sign up to be notified of our launch of our membership website at www.christmasmoviescreenwriter.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next Christmas Movie Screenwriter podcast. Bye.